From the studios of TLC Talk Radio, it's TashaTalks. I'm your girl, Tasha. Don't forget to follow us on all of our social media pages, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and of course, YouTube. Don't forget to catch us every day via your information highway to podcast at TLCTalkRadio.com, 24/7 edutainment. We have a great show lined up for you today. We're so grateful to have Pastor Yolanda Simmons Battle, the pastor of congregational care at Purpose Church, who is our resident therapy friend. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. So glad to be here. So glad to join you again.
Indeed, indeed. So today's conversation actually came out of a conversation I was having with someone. And the question was, God, what was his question? He asked, why do you think people have such a hard time dating? And my response was that people drag their baggage into a relationship without taking time to heal. Not just time, because some people say, oh, I take time between relationships. Yeah, but what did you do with that time? Did you use that time for self-exploration? Did you take that time to say, you know, men ain't this, women ain't that? What were you doing? And so today's conversation revolves around healing, right? And I said, in the middle of the conversation, I started reaching out to you to say, help, come be on this show about this topic. So welcome once again. Let's start from the beginning. Pastor Yo, what is healing?
Well, first thing, healing means different things to different people, right? But at the very core, if you think about a wound that you want healed, is to remove that uncomfortable situation. You want that wound to close. You don't want it to cause you discomfort anymore. So healing is, if you think about it in relationships, things that happen, you want to be healed from that thing that caused you discomfort, something that put you in a situation that shook you out of your norm. It caused you distress. So you don't want to have the distress of that situation to affect you anymore.
Okay. And so that's important because you don't want to take that stress, that wound into another relationship. And in a non-romantic example, it's I had a rough day or rough morning on my way to work. And when I get there, I yell at my entire team.
Yes.
Because I haven't taken the moments I need to say, okay, give me a second. I need to do thus and so. How does one begin the process of healing? So they've gone through a breakup. Their heart hurts. Their emotions are all over the place. It may affect them physically. Stress can kill you. And our friend Love McPherson says that heartbreak affects the brain trauma-wise, just like third-degree burns.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
So what are the first steps?
Yes. So first thing, to heal, same way as a wound, you need to recognize that you have a wound. Sometimes we experience small t trauma, and we don't think that it's big enough that, oh, I can just overlook it, or I don't have to tend to it. Think about when you maybe got a burn from the steam, right? So the fire didn't burn you, but the steam did. So it's not in an immediate sore that you can see on your hand, but you still need to tend to it. So I need to recognize that this thing hurt me. It caused me some stress. It put me in a situation that I don't want to be in. I am feeling some distress about it. So I need to recognize, I need to acknowledge it. And another thing, some people feel like, well, it didn't hurt me before. I've been through this, so it shouldn't hurt me now. Each instance is different.
Sure.
And so there is no condemnation in saying, this hurt me, and I need a moment. And whatever that moment looks like in time for you, truly a moment, a day, weeks, months, whatever that looks like, so I can now the distress can be removed from me.
Mm, And so then we acknowledge the wound. We recognize I need to deal with it. I have a friend who um, feels like sometimes his anxiety is something that he should just power through.
Mm.
And my response, and I'm not a therapist, but my response is always, no one would expect you to power through a foot race if you popped your knee out of joint, or if you broke your leg, or if your ankle was twisted. Why do we feel that we have to just power through, right? What is that about? So the first step is recognizing it. What's next?
The next thing, we need to see what tools that we need to heal from it. And every tool that is out there is not appropriate either for the circumstance or for the person. Each person is different. And so, how we heal from that thing that caused us distress is going to look different for each person. What do you need to do that's not going to cause further harm?
Mm,
You got to put that in there. That's not going to cause harm to another person, because we heard of that line before: hurt people.
certainly.
And so, if we, whatever that tool is, that's not going to cause further harm for ourselves, harm to someone else, then that we need to start looking at, this is going to help heal me from that thing that caused me distress. Every remedy that's out there doesn't work for everyone in every circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
Some antibiotics work for some viruses, some it don't.
Mm,
And it depends upon the person.
true.
Everyone can't take penicillin, right?
Right.
So you have to figure out that remedy that is going to be helpful to you and not cause you further distress and harm and discomfort.
Right. So healing's a process, right?
Yes.
Um, is it a straight line? Is it a series of starts and stops? Is it circular? What does it look like? Or is that a situation where it's just kind of dependent upon both the person and the situation, and maybe even the number of traumatic events he or she has been through?
Absolutely. Healing is definitely a process. It's not a straight line. One of the things, and for those who have vast knowledge, who work with those who suffer from substance use, they see this a lot. That the role to not being a victim or an abuser of substances, it starts and stops. You abstain and then you fall off the wagon. It happens. It's actually part of the process, and is expected for those who work with that particular population. So we need to think about it in a more general sense, that you're going to have starts and stops, and it's not a straight line. And I think that what throws a lot of people off. I start here, I start at A, I need to get to Z. No, you may start at A, get to D, got to go back to B, because once, and see, when you think about the process, when you're in a process, you're learning new things.
Mm,
So then you start learning new things about yourself. Well, why did that bother me? Self reflection. What position did I put myself in to allow that to again to affect me? What could I have done? What was my behavior that shifted, that caused this now to cause me to have some distress? And so there'll be some moments when you're going through self-discovery, then you may fall all the way back and you feel like you started at uh point number one. But what you're doing, you're really just you're gaining new experience. And
mm.
so that experience of the process in the healing now is giving you new revelation on how to move forward.
Kind of like, I go to point, I'm at point A, I go to point D, I learned something. I need to go back to B and maybe apply that lesson. And then maybe I need to stop at C to
Yes.
do some different work. Okay, now I'm back to D.
Yes, absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. And I want to point out a statement you made a little bit earlier that that our friend Love has pointed out that heartache does something to our brain. It is a traumatic experience, a small T trauma, and some are big T trauma. So I'm not negating the level that some individuals feel when it comes to the shift in a relationship. But there's a wonderful book that we're reading, that I'm reading with the Association of Black Counseling Professionals, and we're doing it as a book club, and it's called The Body Keeps Score.
Oh,
And
wow.
this is a book that was recommended by one of our professors in the program in a trauma class. And so we're rereading it because it's so impactful, and there's some scientific language in it, but I believe anyone who's very interested to understand the complexity of what our emotions and things that we go through and how it affects our body, this is a good book to read, and it's called The Body Keeps Score. And I'll pull his name because I don't want to mess up his name. His The author is I think he's German, so I don't want to mess up his name and
Sure. We'll post it
discredit.
on the on the social media pages. That's great. Now, we talked about how your body keeps score. We talked about how your brain obviously is impacting your emotions. A lot of people, they go through weight loss, weight gain, they're stressed, they can't remember things, or they're overly active, or they just drop the ball generally and curl up in the bed. I'm reminded of the scene from The Women of Brewster Place,
Mhm.
when I forget her name, but her daughter died sticking scissors into an electrical outlet, and she literally couldn't do anything. She had not cried. She had not been able to even get out of the bed. And uh, Oprah's character came and dragged her out of the bed and was like, "That's it. You've got to come out of this." And she put her in a tub, and finally she started to cry, and she kept crying and kept crying. How important then is the support of your loved ones, your family, whether that's by blood or creation? How important is that to the path of healing?
I think it's very important. I'm reminded of a phrase that we hear a lot, especially in the faith-based community, that we just do not do life alone. We can't do life alone. And so when you're going through an event that has shifted you,
Mhm.
having that strong support system is imperative. You have to have someone or a group or a community of people that's going to push you, challenge you,
Mhm.
encourage you, and
Mhm.
help correct you.
Mm.
Um, an accountability partner. There's something when you go through for some of the counseling processes. There's some of the one of the questions is, who do you have that we can call in case of an emergency?
Mm.
Who who is your emergency contact? Who can we reach out to if X, Y, or Z happen? That's basically asking who is in your corner, who is helping cheering you on. And so there are moments where your body will shut down because it's a defense mechanism. And so having that person that's going to be strong enough, who's going to be encouraged enough to push through and say, hey, I'm going to pull you out of this, is very important.
Yeah, yeah. And I venture to say that that's the time when you discover who's really your friend and who really has your back. If you're going through something and someone says, "You're not the same, you're not fun." Well, no, ma'am, I suffered a traumatic event and I'm trying to process it. No, I don't want to go dancing with you, particularly not in the middle of a pandemic, but you get my point. Um, you learn that about people. In that process, so we've started the process, we've recognized the wound, we have identified the steps that we need to take toward the path of healing, understanding that it may be a dance, right? It's a start stop. We have identified that the support of our loved ones is integral. What else is integral to remember in the process of healing?
I think one of the other things is to give ourselves grace.
Mm.
We have to give ourselves grace. Some people say they want to get to the finish line. This is a sprint. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And you may have to deal with multiple healing opportunities, right? So give yourself the space and the grace that you may fall back and you got to come up again. You take 3 steps back and you went 5 steps forward. It's okay. It's part of living and growing and understanding who you are. Because healing is not about the other person. It's not about the person who caused the distress or was a who was a component in the distress, right? Healing is all about self. What do I want? And what do I need to be able to move further so I won't repeat the cycle and hurt someone else, cause distress to someone else, pass on the behaviors that put me in that situation, or the behaviors that arose that were birthed because of things that happened that was outside of my control. I don't pass on that behavior to my children or other family members or people that I'm in community with.
Mhm.
Healing is about self for better, to continue to learn more about self and to be the best self that we can be.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. What kind of attitude you talked about graciousness, and I think as people, we don't always give our so it typically we fall into a couple categories. We give ourselves too much grace, and we're just kind of clowning, or we don't give ourselves enough grace, and we beat ourselves up for every error that we make. What is the required attitude to make healing successful, or sets of attitudes?
I believe acknowledgement, grace, and really setting out the goals.
Hmm.
What are your goals for this process? What are your expectations when you going through this healing process? What do you want? And being honest with yourself. Um, a lot of times we say we want to be healed, but we don't really know what we want to be healed from, you
Yeah.
know? And sometimes, and I'm even going to go out on a limb and say, even in that moment, if you say, I don't know, I can't describe or put to words what the healing is going to look like, you've done the first step and acknowledge that you need healing. And so that's when your support system come into play, whomever that person is, or people, community, that can help give you words to what you want. But you also need a goal. What is your expectation from this? And how are you going to be different when the healing comes, when the wound is clear? So, a lot of times we have wounds. Like I have a scar on my knee that I got when I was 9 or 10. That scar doesn't hurt. The wound when I fell and scabbed my knee on the concrete when I was running doesn't hurt anymore. But the reminder is still there when
Hmm.
I look at this scar. So, also, if you see the scar of what you went through, how are you going to respond? Is it going to take you back to
Mm.
that moment? Or are you going to be able to look at the scar and be able to still move on forward with life and not allow it to take you back? Which is why that book, that The Body Keeps Score, is so important, because things attach ourselves internally that will cause some of us to blank out
Mhm.
and go back to that moment because we haven't really gathered the ability to learn and enjoy life post that moment that caused the distress. I mean, that could be a whole nother discussion. But so we have knowing what your goals are and understanding, having a vision of that is going to look like once you get to that point where you say you are healed, not by anybody else's definition either,
Yeah.
not by anyone else. Now we can say, I can say, okay, You need to be delivered and healed from this issue. But it's up to you to acknowledge and to say and be honest. I am healed from this. I am ready to move on in whatever that situation is.
You brought up something that made me think of an analogy, and it may very well be the way horses get out of holes. But there was a story I heard about a horse, a horse or a donkey, don't remember. Some four-legged hooved animal was stuck in a space, and its owner asked another farmer to come help, and he kept putting dirt into the hole that this animal was in. And the owner was like, "Hey, that's not what I said. I said, help me get him out." And he's like, "I am. Wait." And he's steady dumping dirt. And the animal begins to stomp on the dirt. And then the more he does it, the more the animal stomps. And now he's risen to where he can just walk off. I think that's a great illustration
Mhm.
of healing.
Yeah.
When you can take what's thrown at you, use it for your own good and to triumph over it. I think that's
Yes.
important. Is professional help always required for healing?
I think depending on what the circumstance is, there are, and again, because we are all beautiful, different, wonderful people, we process information differently. What affected one person a certain way may not affect another person the same way. So
Mhm.
they may not need a professional to help guide them. And the important thing is when you speak of a professional, so anyone in the behavioral sciences, a therapist, a counselor, psychotherapist, social worker, even, because there are Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If I can't think about how I'm gonna feed my children, I can't think about
Right.
healing from the trauma that my mom didn't give me love when I was 12.
Yep.
Some things take order, right? So um, I think having a professional who will work with you, that's the key. That's the thing. And the counselors and those and those of us in this space, we work with you. We are not the expert on your life. You're the expert. And so the professional will help guide you to reach those goals that you have set for yourself. You need a someone who's empathetic,
Mm.
who's going to listen, but also who can challenge you, who can bring back up. So your goal, can say, for instance, your goal when we talked about when we first started, this was the goal you wanted to reach. So how does that go back to reaching this goal?
Right.
That could be a challenge for people, like, shock into the system. Whereas your friends might be like, oh, yes, girl, do it, do you, which is, we need that, right? We need that in our corner. But you also need that person who's going to help remind you and provide tools and resources that comes from, you know, years of studying and using evidence-based research
So,
to align with you, the expert in your own life.
yeah, definitely. When we talk about selecting a counselor, obviously not everybody is a good fit for everybody. Um, there may be wonderful people, maybe a wonderful counselor, doesn't mean they match. What are some important questions that one should ask when getting ready to select a counselor? Because it is a relationship.
Yes, it is. It is a relationship. Yes. And this is a very good point to bring up. Just like you research when you go for a doctor, a physical doctor, and you try to see about the fit. When you go and visit those in the behavioral sciences and the therapist and the counselor, there's a intake questionnaire that usually takes place. And it's an opportunity for the therapist and you as the individual to hear what the style of the therapist tells what their theoretical orientation may be. This is how they perceive to walk and work with the client, how what the length of time that they'll work with you, depending on what the issue may be, what the concern is. And then your ability to ask questions back, what is expected? How are we reaching our goals? Do you provide homework? There are counselors who provide homework, that's part of their theoretical orientation. So, do we meet once a week, twice a week? If I feel like something is too tough, how do we deal with that? And so, yes, that is the opportunity to ask questions. And I even believe, and there are some other schools of thought other counselors who believe that do a kind of do a test, visit a couple of other therapists to see what is the right fit for you. Um, get referrals,
Mm,
talk to friends, and see what their experiences have been. We have been in our culture, Black culture, the thought of going to see a therapist was shunned upon
sure.
for years. It was shunned upon. It was like, you pray about it and God will work it out. Well, yes, and you know, yes, and you still
Right.
got to do the work.
He
And so
created these therapists for you.
for you,
Mhm.
angels walking among us. So that's so test them out. Ask questions. And if you don't feel comfortable in that first meeting, you can ask if there's someone else within their agency, the practice that they can recommend, because this is what you're looking for. If you're looking for someone who's have uh, um, expertise in a particular area, like in LGBTQ community, who has expertise in familiar relationships. You have marriage and family therapists who specialize in marriage and family. So if there's something specific, there are counselors who have a particular niche. And so they do extensive study
Yeah.
in a particular area. So that's who you want to reach out to and want to work with. So yes.
That's great. Now, what how can one differentiate between this is just not a good fit and they're challenging me. I really just don't want to do this work. So, that's the person who is they just don't get me, when really the issue is you don't want to do the hard work. It's hard to look in the mirror, right? It's hard. When you begin to recognize that some of the issues you're complaining about may have been self-created, or worse, created by someone you idolize. When you discover
Yes.
your mother has been taking advantage of you your entire life,
Yes.
uh, or your dad was really not in your corner, he just pretended, or your sister or whoever. When you realize that, it's hard. So how do you differentiate between this isn't a good fit and ooh, I really just don't want to do this? The prophet Teddy Pendergrass tells us, that's my running joke, that you can't hide from yourself, right?
Right. That's right.
So in your heart of hearts, but how can people make the distinction?
Well, I believe that if once you're at that point, if you're in your therapy sessions and your sessions, and you're at the point where the therapist is challenging you to really look within yourself, and you're feeling like, oh, this is hard, and they're pushing me, and then you're like, well, this is not a good fit. You've been in your sessions for a couple of weeks. That doesn't just come right out. I mean, many therapists are not going to start right out at the first session saying, okay, I need you to tell me XYZ. No, because it is a relationship, and we're learning each other, right? We have to learn each other. We have to get to understand the style,
Sure.
right? So it's going to take a couple of sessions. Now, I may have already started dropping those questions, in some of our sessions,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm picking up on some things that you're saying, and I'm referring it back to your goals. But that probably is not going to come until much later. So you have already essentially felt like this was going to be a good fit. This was going to be the relationship that I need. So we've already built up this relationship. So now, if I've challenged you and pushed you and you're questioning, then it really is, you have to really think, well, maybe I am being pushed to the point that it's hard for me. Also, though, I do want to say there are times that if you feel like you're being pushed on a certain issue, it may not be the time. And so the therapist could have presented the opportunity to push when you're not ready. And that happens.
Yeah.
And so the therapist will know just by your reaction, either nonverbal, mostly nonverbal reaction, and can pull it back a little bit. But it's knowing that this is something that we really need to start to delve into. But this, we do no harm. That is we do not do harm. And
Right.
so we broach a subject, it's the broaching, that's going to do some further harm, then counselors they know. We're
Pull
rolling
back.
back a second. Hmm. We're
Okay.
not going to forget about it.
Let's put a pin there. We'll come back to it in a different session.
Yeah. And maybe think about a different approach, like a different way to bring this up, So yeah,
Got it.
creative.
I
Very
think
creative.
I think that's great. What is one takeaway you'd like the listeners and viewers to take from this session that we just had?
I want people to know that it is okay to acknowledge that you want to be healed. I think it's so important. It shows that you want to learn more about yourself, and you want to have the most authentic life that you can have, that you're destined to have. So acknowledging the hurt does not mean that you are weak. Not at all. It means you are strong and you have courage.
I love it. Pastor Yo, pastor of Congregational Care at Purpose Church, Pastor Yolanda Simmons Battle. Thank you so much for being a part of the show. This is Tasha Talks from the studios of TLC Talk Radio. Don't forget to catch us on all of our platforms, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. Jesus, where are we? We're everywhere. And of course, we're on TLCTalkRadio.com, 24/7 entertainment. We'll catch you next week.